There is a specific kind of madness that only exists on the 23rd floor of a corporate high-rise after the cleaning crew has turned on the vacuum cleaners 3 hallways over. It is a world measured not in seasons or sunrises, but in the relentless hum of fluorescent lights, the crisp click of mechanical keyboards, and the artificial urgency of third-quarter deliverables. For Ethan, that madness had a name, a face, and an impeccably tailored wardrobe, and her name was Sloane Mercer. As the director of corporate strategy, Ethan was a man who lived by the clean, unyielding parameters of quantitative logic. He viewed the market as a massive machine to be optimized, his mind operating like an advanced algorithm that calculated risk, market share, and competitive advantages before most people could finish their morning espresso. He was clinical, focused, and utterly ruthless when it came to defending his department's trajectory. But the one variable he could never completely calculate, the single anomaly that defied every model he threw at it, was the director of design. Sloane Mercer was the absolute antithesis of his spreadsheets, a woman of sharp, architectural brilliance who treated branding not as a series of graphs, but as an aggressive psychological campaign. She moved through the open-plan office with a terrifying, effortless confidence, her dark eyes flashing with an intelligence that could dismantle a junior analyst's entire week with a single, raised eyebrow. They were work rivals in the truest, most exhausting sense of the word, two hyper-competent predators occupying the same professional territory. For months, the executive board had deliberately dangled a single, massive promotion between them, the newly created position of Senior Vice President of Global Brand Strategy, fostering what the CEO loudly called healthy internal competition. It was a corporate gladiator arena, a systematic game designed to push them to the absolute brink of exhaustion. Yet, beneath the sharp banter, the aggressive boardroom posturing, and the fiercely defended departmental budgets, lay a beautifully complex, unwritten code of mutual obsession. They had mastered the art of platonic camouflage, getting close enough to completely dominate each other's daily routines without ever giving their connection a name that could compromise their careers. They were the kind of enemies who would viciously tear each other's ideas apart during a 10-way executive call at 2 in the afternoon, only for Ethan to quietly log into the shared corporate server at 7:30 p.m. to silently correct a weaponized formatting typo on Sloane's pitch deck before the international partners could see it. They were the kind of rivals who dropped high-protein bars onto each other's desks with a cold, silent indifference whenever they noticed the other had skipped lunch for 3 consecutive days. During brutal, blood-soaked client pitches, when an external executive vice president would attempt to corner Sloane on a technical metric, Ethan would instantly step into the conversational firing line, unleashing a devastating wave of analytical data to completely shield her, his eyes never leaving his spreadsheets as he protected her blind spot. They had built a perfect, dangerous fortress out of their rivalry, keeping the entire corporate structure from realizing that they were entirely dependent on each other's friction to feel alive. The fragile equilibrium of that corporate Stockholm syndrome completely disintegrated on a late, silent Thursday evening. The clock on the wall of the grand, glass-walled war room read exactly 8:15 p.m. The rest of the 23rd floor was a dark, abandoned cavern of empty cubicles and flickering dual monitors, but the war room was illuminated by a sharp, clinical ambient glow. Outside the massive glass panes, the city skyline stretched out like a sprawling grid of neon gold and deep blue, a silent witness to the exhaustion heavying the room. Sloane entered the space silently, her high heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor, carrying 2 perfect, identical black coffees from the artisanal shop down the block, exactly 2 sugars for Ethan, purely black for herself, a detail she had memorized 3 years ago and never once acknowledged aloud. She set his cup down on the massive mahogany table with a casual, practiced flick of her wrist, preparing to launch into a sharp, witty critique of his latest market penetration forecast. Before she could open her mouth, Ethan closed his laptop with a slow, heavy finality that resonated through the quiet room. He didn't reach for the coffee. He stood up, turning his back to the corporate table to stare out at the glowing city below, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The absolute gravity of his posture caused a sudden, sharp spike of apprehension to tighten in Sloane's throat. "I signed an offer with Vanguard Alpha this afternoon," Ethan said, his voice completely flat, devoid of its usual clinical authority, carrying a quiet, devastating weight that made the air in the room feel instantly freezing. "They're creating a custom global strategy division for me. It's a 40% raise, full equity, and an autonomous board seat. My formal resignation letter hits the CEO's inbox tomorrow at 9 a.m. The words hung in the sterile air like a physical blow. Sloane froze in the center of the war room, her fingers still resting against the warm cardboard of her coffee cup. The world seemed to drop away beneath her feet, her analytical mind completely scrambling as the reality of his departure fractured her defenses. For a long, agonizing 3 seconds, she tried to find her professional mask, tried to deploy a sarcastic comment about corporate treason or a sharp joke about him selling out to their primary competitor. But the camouflage failed her completely. The sheer, physical weight of the betrayal was too sudden, too violent to be processed through the filter of corporate vocabulary. Her composure completely collapsed. "You're leaving?" Sloane asked, her voice cracking slightly, a raw, unscripted hurt breaking through the polished exterior she had guarded for years. She took a step toward the table, her face turning pale as she stared at his turned back, her hands trembling with a sudden, violent panic. "You are actively walking out of this firm? After 8 months of this hell? After we tore each other to pieces for that senior vice president role? You're just going to pack your tailored gray suits and abandon me here? In this empty, miserable office, with a dead ficus in the corner and a board of directors that doesn't know the difference between a brand strategy and a tax write-off?" Ethan turned around slowly, his chest heaving as he looked at her. He expected her to be angry. He expected her to launch a strategic, defensive corporate attack to protect her own claim to the impending promotion. But as his eyes locked onto her face, he stopped dead in his tracks. He saw the tears shimmering at the edges of her dark eyes, the absolute vulnerability transforming her sharp features, and the raw, unvarnished panic vibrating through her frame. He realized in a single, breathless flash that Sloane had completely forgotten to pretend she didn't care. The fierce, untouchable design director had left her armor on the corporate floor, standing before him completely defenseless. Caught completely off guard by the depth of her reaction, Sloane took another step forward, her voice rising with a furious, emotional intensity that filled the entire glass war room. "I was going to let you have it, Ethan," she cried, her tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, tracing hot lines through her makeup. "You think I wanted that stupid senior VP title? I didn't care about the corporate ladder. I've been working 80-hour weeks, optimizing my design metrics and pushing my team to the absolute brink of sanity just so I could stay parallel to you. I was planning to let you win the promotion first, Ethan. I was going to let you take the seat, just so the competition would finally be over, just so we would no longer be rivals, and just so I could finally find the courage to walk into your office as an equal and tell you how much I think about you outside of this building. I have spent 2 years rewriting my entire life around your schedule, Ethan. I don't look at graphs without wondering if you'd approve of the axis. I don't pitch clients without waiting for your nod from the back of the room. And you're just leaving? You're just going to walk out that door and act like we were nothing more than a healthy competitive metric?" Ethan stared at her, the spreadsheets, the quantitative models, and the 40% raise at Vanguard Alpha completely dissolving into total insignificance in his mind. The corporate logic that had guided his entire adult life was utterly leveled by the raw, beautiful chaos of her confession. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his own protective walls completely burning away as he walked out from behind the mahogany table, his steps deliberate and heavy. "The entire firm stopped mattering to me 6 months ago, Sloane," Ethan said, his voice dropping into a deep, intense register that vibrated straight through her chest. He stopped just 2 feet away from her, his gray eyes burning with a fierce, long-suppressed devotion. "You think I took the Vanguard offer for the money? I took it because I was losing my mind, Sloane. I was sitting in those boardrooms watching our executives treat your brilliant mind like a simple asset to be leveraged. I took it because as long as we were occupying the same professional space, as long as that dangling promotion stood between our departments, I was legally and ethically barred from touching you. I was trapped behind a firewall of human resources policies and conflict of interest clauses. Every single time I corrected a slide on your deck, every single time I stepped into the line of fire during a client pitch, I wasn't trying to beat you, Sloane. I was trying to keep you safe. I realized 3 weeks ago that if I stayed on this 23rd floor, I would spend the next 10 years climbing a corporate ladder that led absolutely nowhere. Because you're the only part of this entire high-rise that I would actually miss if the building burned to the ground tomorrow morning. The absolute silence of the empty office settled over them, but the static between their bodies was deafening. Ethan stepped closer, completely shattering the invisible, professional distance they had maintained for years. He reached out, his large hands steady and warm as they slid up the tailored silk of her blazer, his palms resting against the sides of her neck, his thumbs gently wiping away the tear tracks on her flushed cheeks. He looked down into her wide, trembling eyes, his voice stripping away the last remnants of their workplace vocabulary. "No more deliverables, Sloane," Ethan whispered, his breath warm against her lips, his fingers tangling slightly in the dark hair at the base of her neck. "No more performance reviews, no more synergy, and no more healthy competition. I am completely done pretending that you are just my rival. I have spent 8 years analyzing market trends, and you are the only absolute certainty I have ever found." With a deep, emotional release that had been delayed for thousands of hours of overtime, Ethan leaned down and kissed her. It was a passionate, intensely gripping, and deeply cinematic first kiss that completely redefined the glass war room. It carried the wild, kinetic energy of every late-night spreadsheet they had ever cross-referenced, every silent glance they had ever traded across crowded conference tables, and every unspoken declaration of love they had hidden behind sharp, witty corporate banter. Sloane let out a soft, breathless gasp against his mouth, her arms instantly flying around his neck, her fingers locking tightly into the fabric of his shirt as she pulled him closer, anchoring her entire existence to his frame. He pressed her back gently until her shoulders met the cold, solid glass window overlooking the glowing city skyline, the brilliant grid of neon gold framing their figures as they completely melted into each other's warmth. The 23rd floor was no longer a gladiator arena of stress and isolation. It had become their sanctuary, the place where their perfect, elaborate lie had finally died to make room for a beautiful, raw reality. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads resting against each other, their breath coming in shallow, synchronized hitches, Sloane let out a soft, emotional laugh, her fingers gently playing with the collar of his tailored suit. "I suppose this means your transition plan is officially compromised," she murmured, her classic, sharp wit returning, though her dark eyes were brighter and more full of life than Ethan had ever seen them. "The transition plan is executing perfectly," Ethan replied, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across his face as he kissed her forehead, then her nose, before pulling her tightly against his chest, wrapping his arms around her as if he would never let her go. "I'm just taking the most valuable asset of this firm with me. The poetic justice of the universe has a wonderful way of finalizing a design when you stop trying to force the parameters." A month later, the 23rd floor was a distant, fading memory. The autumn afternoon sunlight was streaming through the wide windows of a quiet, bohemian coffee shop on the lower west side of the city, completely far away from the clinical glare of fluorescent office grids. Ethan was sitting at a corner wooden table, dressed in a relaxed, open-collared linen shirt, his new Vanguard Alpha corporate tablet resting closed next to his saucer. He was no longer staring at a countdown clock or managing a toxic executive board. His posture was relaxed, his mind filled with a profound, unshakable peace. The front bell of the coffee shop chimed, and Sloane walked in, wearing a soft, unstructured knit sweater and carrying a portfolio of independent design sketches. She looked absolutely radiant, the sharp, defensive lines of corporate exhaustion completely erased from her face. She walked straight to his table, a bright, beautiful smile illuminating her features as she slid into the chair opposite him. She didn't bring two identical black coffees this time. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers instantly interlocking with his with a natural, perfect telepathy, her thumb tracing the lines of his palm in the open light of day, completely free of human resources guidelines, corporate secrecy, or competitive anxiety. They were working at separate firms now, dominating their respective industries as independent forces, but their shared routine was an absolute, permanent covenant that belonged entirely to them. Have you ever risked breaking a perfect, safe professional boundary for a love that was too loud to ignore? Or did you let the corporate ladder climb all over your chances?